They said she wouldn't last a single night on the ridge. They said the wolves, or the crushing cold, or the sheer maddening silence of the mountains would break her spirit before the sun even thought about rising. After all, she was Elara Vance, the daughter of the wealthiest land baron in the territory, a girl draped in silk and protected by iron gates. But when she refused to be sold like cattle in a business merger disguised as a marriage, her own father threw her into the winter night with nothing but the clothes on her back. But the mountains have a way of rewriting destiny. Just when the frost began to claim her, she found something no one in the valley believed existed anymore. She found a ghost, a man named Elias Thorne, who had buried his heart 6 feet under the frozen earth and pointed a rifle at the world to keep it away. What started as a desperate rescue became a legend of betrayal, corruption, and a love so fierce it could burn down the gilded. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of how two broken souls fixed each other when the whole world wanted them destroyed. Welcome back to Frontier Rescue Stories. Before we step into the snow and uncover the secrets of Blackwood Ridge, please do me a massive favor. Hit that like button, share this story with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the firewood that keeps this camp burning. And I have to ask, from which part of the world are you watching this story tonight? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Now pull your coat tight and settle in. The storm is here. In the autumn of 1889, the town of Pinehaven sat in the shadow of the Blue Ridge, mountains like a jewel, set in iron. It was a place of industry, of law, and of men who believed they had tamed the wild heart of the continent. But for Elara Vance, the 22-year-old daughter of the valley's most ruthless timber baron, Pinehaven was not a home. It was a prison built of velvet and mahogany. The Vance estate loomed over the town, a sprawling Victorian mansion that smelled perpetually of beeswax, lemon oil, and the stifling weight of expectations. On this particular Sunday, the house was vibrating with a tension that felt almost physical. Servants moved through the hallways with their heads bowed, terrified of making a sound. In the kitchen, silver was being polished until it gleamed like weaponry. Upstairs, Elara stood by her bedroom window, looking up toward the ridge. The mountains were ablaze with the colors of late autumn, riots of ochre, burnt orange, and deep crimson. They were wild and chaotic, everything she was forbidden to be. Her fingers, stained slightly with charcoal from a morning of secret sketching, traced the line of the trees on the cold glass. She felt a longing so deep it was an ache in her chest, a desire to dissolve into that wildness and escape the suffocating order of her father's world. "Elara!" The voice of Elias Vance boomed from the foyer, shaking the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. It was a voice like a gavel striking a block, final, loud and demanding absolute submission. "The judge is here. Check your demeanor. And for God's sake, pinch your cheeks. You look like a ghost." Elara wiped the charcoal from her thumb onto her petticoat, a small act of rebellion, and smoothed the silk of her imported dress. She took a breath, holding it for a moment to steady her racing heart, and descended the grand staircase. Each step felt like a surrender. Her mother, Clara, waited in the shadows of the landing. Clara Vance was a woman whose spirit had been eroded by 30 years of peacekeeping. She was beautiful in a faded, fragile way, like a pressed flower that would crumble if touched too roughly. She reached out and adjusted Elara's pearl choker, her hands trembling slightly. "Soft eyes, Elara," Clara whispered, the family mantra. "Please, just for tonight. Soft eyes. Do not provoke him." Dinner was a battlefield disguised as a meal. The dining room was illuminated by the cold, hissing light of gas lamps that cast long, flickering shadows against the damask wallpaper. At the head of the table sat Silas, a man who carved the roast beef with the same violent precision he used to carve up the county map. To his right sat the guest of honor, Judge Ambrose Sterling. Sterling was a man of 55 with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a reputation for hanging men who stood in the way of the railroad expansion. He watched Elara over the rim of his crystal wine glass, his gaze possessing a predatory weight that made her skin crawl. "The roast is exquisite, Silas," Judge Sterling said, his voice smooth like oil on water. "It takes a firm hand to produce such quality, in livestock and in lineage." "Indeed," Silas replied, pouring a vintage claret that cost more than a farmhand's yearly wages. "Discipline is the bedrock of civilization, Ambrose. Which brings us to the reason for this evening." Elara felt the room tilt. The air grew heavy, suffocating. smelling of rich gravy and cigar smoke. She looked at her mother, begging silently for intervention. But Clara was studying the intricate floral pattern on the fine china, practicing the art of invisibility. "Elara, pay attention," Silas commanded, setting down his knife. "Judge Sterling has made a generous, I dare say magnificent, offer for your hand in marriage. The union will solidify the merger between my timber holdings and the new Great Southern Rail Spur. It is a strategic alliance that will secure this family's future for a century. You will be married in the spring." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of Elara's life. She looked at the judge, seeing the smug satisfaction on his face. She wasn't a person to them. She was a deed to a property, a signature on a contract. "No," Elara whispered. Silas blinked as if the furniture had suddenly spoken. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Elara's voice rose, fueled by a lifetime of swallowed words. She gripped the tablecloth until her knuckles turned white. "I am not a timber holding. I am not a rail spur. I will not marry him." "You will do as you are told," Silas roared, slamming his fist on the table. The silverware jumped. "Do you think your little sketches, your foolish dreams of the Art Academy in Philadelphia will feed you? You exist in this world because I allow it. I built this cage to keep you safe from the filth out there." "You built a cage to keep yourself feeling big," Elara shouted, standing up, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. "And I would rather freeze in the mountains than suffocate in your luxury for one more second." The judge chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that made Elara's blood boil. "She has spirit, Silas. I'll enjoy breaking that. A spirited mare always makes the best mount once she's broken to the bit." That comment snapped the last tether of Elara's control. She threw her napkin onto the table. "I am not a mare to be broken." Silas stood, his face purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his temple. "Get out." The words hung in the air. "If you think you can survive without my protection, go. Leave this house. Take what you can carry in 5 minutes. After that, the doors lock, and you are dead to this family. You hear me? Dead." Elara didn't hesitate. She ran from the room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She dashed into her bedroom, grabbing a heavy wool shawl, her sketchbook, a box of charcoal, and a small tintype photograph of her grandmother. She didn't have boots for the mud, only the thin leather slippers intended for parlor carpets. As she reached the heavy oak front door, her mother intercepted her. Clara didn't speak. She couldn't risk the wrath of the patriarch, who was surely listening, but she grabbed Elara's hand and pressed a small, cold object into her palm. It was a gold locket, heavy and old, a final lifeline from a woman who couldn't save herself, but might help save her daughter. "Go!" Silas screamed from the dining room, the sound of glass shattering following his voice. "And when the wolves find you, remember who sent you to them." Elara stepped out into the twilight. The wind from the mountains hit her like a physical blow, carrying the scent of pine needles and the metallic tang of coming snow. She didn't look back at the mansion, glowing warm and malicious in the valley below. She turned toward the dark, winding road that led up Blackwood Ridge. She was terrified. She was ill-equipped, but for the first time in 22 years, the air she breathed was her own. The Appalachian night does not fall. It rises from the hollows, swallowing the world in shadow. As Elara climbed, the manicured reality of Pinehaven dissolved behind her. The cobbled streets gave way to a rutted dirt track, flanked by the towering silhouettes of ancient oaks and the skeletal reach of blight-stricken chestnuts. The temperature plummeted. This was the smoke of the Smoky Mountains, a damp, bone-chilling mist that clung to the skin and seeped into the very marrow of your bones. Elara walked until her feet bled. The thin soles of her parlor shoes were shredded by the sharp gravel and exposed roots of the mountain path. Every sound in the forest was amplified by her fear. The snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. The hoot of a barred owl. "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" sounded like a mocking inquiry into her solitude. She was entering the domain of the wild, a place where status and money meant nothing, and survival was the only currency. She walked for hours. The sensory deprivation of the dark began to play tricks on her mind. The swaying branches became the arms of suitors reaching to grab her. The wind through the pines sounded like her father's whispers. She was walking into the nothingness, a state known well to those who are discarded by their families. But as the fatigue set in, deeper and heavier than she had ever known, so did a strange euphoric clarity. She stopped to catch her breath, leaning against the rough bark of a hickory tree. She looked up. Above the canopy, through the gaps in the leaves, the stars were brighter than she had ever seen them. In the valley, the coal smoke and gas lamps obscured the heavens, but here, they were diamonds scattered on black velvet, indifferent, magnificent, and free. By midnight, the cold had settled into her core. Hypothermia began its seductive whisper, promising sleep, promising peace if she would just close her eyes for a moment. She stumbled, her silk dress tearing on a briar of smilax, the blaspheme vine that locals swore waited to trap the unwary. She fell to her knees, the cold mud soaking through her dress. She crawled toward the base of a massive white oak, curling into the leaf litter to preserve what little warmth she had left. She clutched the locket her mother had given her, the metal biting into her palm. Her vision began to blur. The world was fading to gray. Barking. A sound like thunder rolled down the ridge. Deep, chest-rattling barks that cut through the wind. Through the haze of her freezing mind, Elara saw a light. A lantern swinging in the darkness, creating a halo in the mist. A shape emerged, a massive livestock guardian dog, likely a Great Pyrenees, white as a ghost in the gloom, and behind it, a figure that seemed hewn from the mountain itself. Elias Thorne was 48 years old, but his eyes held the weight of a century. He wore a coat of rough-spun wool, patched and repatched, and carried a Winchester rifle with the ease of a man who slept with it, within arm's reach. He was a homesteader in the truest sense, a man who existed on the edge of survival by choice, turning his back on a society he no longer understood. "Rex, heel!" His voice was gravel and wood smoke, low but commanding. The massive dog stopped instantly. Sitting a few feet from Elara, its head cocked, Elias lowered the lantern, the yellow light illuminating Elara's pale, shivering form. He didn't gasp. He didn't ask foolish questions. He saw the silk dress now ruined with mud. He saw the bleeding feet wrapped in shredded leather. He saw the sheer desperation in her eyes. He knew the Vance family. Everyone in the county did. He knew the cruelty that hid behind their velvet curtains and iron gates. "You're a long way from the ballroom, miss," Elias said, his tone devoid of judgment but heavy with caution. I can't go back," Elara stammered, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form the words. Elias looked down the mountain, toward the distant twinkling lights of the town, then back at the girl curling into the roots of the tree. "Ain't nobody asking you to," he grunted. He shifted his rifle to his left hand and stooped down. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing more than a sack of feed. She was light, too light. He smelled of pipe tobacco, pine resin, and the honest sweat of hard labor. To Elara, fading in and out of consciousness, it was the smell of safety. "Hold on," he murmured, his voice vibrating against her ear. "Cabin's just up the rise. We'll get some Adam's ale into you and warm those bones." As he carried her through the dark, Elara realized she wasn't being rescued by a knight in shining armor. She was being rescued by the mountain itself, embodied in a man who had turned his back on the world she was fleeing. She rested her head against his rough coat and let the darkness take her, trusting, for the first time that night, that she might actually wake up. Elara woke to the sound of a rooster crowing, a raw and piercing sound that shattered the silence of the morning. She was warm. That was the first sensation, an impossible, enveloping warmth. She opened her eyes to find herself in a bed filled with corn shuck ticking, covered by a quilt of heavy, mismatched wool squares. It was a log cabin pattern, she realized with a painter's eye, the red square in the center representing the hearth of the home. She sat up slowly, her body aching. The cabin was sparse, aggressively functional. The walls were rough-hewn logs, chinked with a mixture of mud and straw. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a fire popping and hissing within it. Cast iron skillets hung on the wall like armor. A rifle rack held 2 guns, cleaned and oiled. But there were anomalies in this rugged space. A delicate porcelain teacup sat next to a dented tin plate on the shelf. A dried wreath of wildflowers hung over the mantel, brown and brittle with age, dust clinging to the petals. She found Elias outside on the porch, splitting wood. The rhythm was hypnotic. Swing, crack, stack. Swing, crack, stack. He didn't stop when the screen door creaked open. "Coffee's on the stove," he said, not looking up. "Black, strong enough to float a horseshoe." "Thank you," she said, her voice raspy. She wrapped the heavy quilt around her shoulders like a royal cape. "For saving me." Elias rested the axe on the chopping block. He looked at her, really looked at her, with eyes that were slate gray and guarded. "You're Silas Vance's girl." I saw the likeness in the firelight. I was, Elara corrected, stepping into the cold morning air. I'm nobody's girl now. Well, nobody. Elias wiped his brow with a rag. You can stay till the storm passes. Then you gotta go. I don't take in strays. Not anymore. But the storm, a metaphorical one and a literal Appalachian squall that rolled in that afternoon, did not pass quickly. Days turned into a week. Elara, desperate to prove she wasn't a burden, threw herself into the work of the homestead. She learned that survival here was a brutal choreography. She learned to milk the goat, her hands cramping in the cold morning air until she found the rhythm. She learned to gather eggs, dodging the aggressive peck of the broody hen who guarded her nest like a dragon. She learned to haul water from the spring, the bucket cutting into her palms, her muscles screaming in protest. This was the daily chores of the frontier: feed the animals, tend the fire, weed the winter garden, and mend the fences. Repeat until dark. Yet, despite the proximity, a distance remained. The cabin held a secret. There was a door at the back of the main room that Elias never opened. He moved around it like water flowing around a stone in the river, acknowledging it only by his avoidance. One afternoon, while Elias was checking his trap lines further up the ridge, curiosity overcame Elara's fear. She approached the door. It wasn't locked, just stiff with disuse. She pushed it open. It was a studio. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the gloom. An easel stood in the center of the room, covered by a white sheet. Piles of canvases were stacked against the walls. Elara stepped inside, the smell of turpentine and old lavender hitting her like a memory. She approached the easel and pulled the sheet down. It was a portrait of Elias, but this wasn't the hardened man she knew. This Elias was younger, his face unlined by grief, laughing at someone behind the artist's perspective. The technique was masterful, heavy impasto strokes, capturing the texture of his beard, delicate glazing bringing a sparkle to his eyes that was now gone. Get out. The voice was low, trembling with suppressed rage. Elara spun around. Elias filled the doorway, his face pale, his chest heaving. I'm sorry, she gasped, backing away. I didn't know. I said get out, he roared, stepping forward and snatching the sheet from her hands to cover the painting. Don't you ever go in here. This place, this is hers. Who? Elara whispered, pressing herself against the wall. Sarah, Elias said, the name breaking in his throat like a dry twig. My wife, she died 4 years ago. Winter fever. He slumped against the doorframe, the anger draining away as quickly as it had come, revealing a bottomless well of yearning. This was the inhibited grief. The doctors in the city spoke of a wound that refused to close because the survivor refused to let it bleed. She was an artist, Elara said softly, recognizing the tools scattered on the table. She used oils, lead white, ultramarine. She was incredible. Elias looked at her, tears shining in his eyes, reflecting the dust motes. She saw beauty in this hard land. I only saw work. When she died, I closed the door. I thought if I locked the door, I could lock the pain away. You can't, Elara said, stepping closer, her own artist's heart aching for him. Pain is like paint, Elias. If you don't use it, it dries up and ruins the brush. But if you use it, you can make something new. You can make something true. For the first time in 4 years, Elias didn't look away. He looked at the girl who had invaded his sanctuary, the daughter of his enemy, and instead of a stranger, he saw a kindred spirit, another soul trying to make beauty out of a broken world. Winter came to Blackwood Ridge not as a thief, but as a blanket. The snow silenced the world, cutting off the cabin from the valley below, sealing them into a pocket of time. In that isolation, a new life began to bloom, tentative and green beneath the frost. Elias retrieved the paints from the locked room a few days after their confrontation. He set them on the kitchen table one morning without a word. It was an offering, a peace treaty. They'll dry out if they sit, he grunted, pouring his coffee, refusing to meet her eyes. Might as well use me. Elara began to paint. She painted the view from the porch, the atmospheric perspective of the blue ridges, fading into white mist, layer upon layer of mountains disappearing into infinity. She painted the stark, brutal lines of the barn against the snow. She painted Rex, the dog, sleeping by the fire, his paws twitching in dreams of chasing rabbits. And Elias watched. He watched her hands, stained with pigment, move with a grace that reminded him of Sarah, but with a fire that was entirely Elara's. He began to see his own land. Through her eyes, he saw that the dead chestnut tree wasn't just firewood. It was a sculpture of resilience. He saw that the morning light on the frozen creek wasn't just cold. It was diamonds. One evening, as they sat by the fire mending harness leather, the silence between them shifted. It was no longer empty. It was companionable. "We tried to have children," Elias said suddenly, his voice steady but quiet. "Never took. Sarah said her paintings were her children, said she was leaving a piece of herself behind in every canvas." "She did," Elara replied, sketching his profile in charcoal on a scrap of paper. "And you're keeping them safe." "I was hoarding them," Elias corrected, looking into the flames. "Like a miser with gold, you let the light back in, Elara. You opened the curtains." The shift was subtle. It wasn't the fiery, dramatic romance of a dime novel. It was the slow, steady burn of an oak log in the hearth. It was the intimacy of shared chores, him chopping the wood, her stacking it. Him killing the rabbit, her stewing it with winter savory and dried apples she found in the root cellar. It was a partnership born of survival that blossomed into respect. But the world of men does not tolerate paradise. It began with a letter, nailed to the fence post at the bottom of the ridge. A bright orange notice that screamed against the white snow. Notice of survey. Elias tore it down, his face darkening. "Railroad!" he spat, crumpling the paper in his fist. "They've been sniffing around these hills for years. But they never came this high. It's too steep." "My father," Elara said, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She remembered the dinner. "The night I left. He was meeting with Judge Sterling. They talked about a merger, a new rail spur." Elias looked at the crumpled notice, then at Elara. The pieces clicked into place. "This isn't about a railroad," Elias growled. "This is about leverage. They want the land to get to you. Or they want you to get the land. Either way, they're coming." He went to the mantel and took down the Winchester. He began to clean it, the smell of gun oil filling the room, a sharp, metallic scent that signaled the end of peace. His movements were methodical, practiced. "I won't let them take you," Elias said, not looking up from the mechanism. "And I won't let them take this mountain. This is our home now." The use of the word "our" hung in the air, heavy and sweet. Elara reached out and covered his hand with hers. His skin was rough, calloused, scarred from decades of labor. Hers was stained with paint. Together they looked like a map of the frontier itself, beautiful, rugged and inextricably bound. "We fight," she whispered. "We fight," he agreed. For the next 3 days they prepared. They weren't just waiting for a lawyer. They were waiting for a siege. Elias showed her how to load the rifle, how to aim, how to breathe. But more importantly, he showed her the land. He showed her the property markers, the old survey stones from his grandfather's time. He showed her the hidden ravines and the unstable slopes. "If they want this land," Elias told her, standing on the edge of the ridge, looking down at the town, "they're going to have to understand what it is. It's not just dirt, Elara, it's blood." As the sun set on the third day, casting long purple shadows across the snow, they stood together on the porch. The silence of the mountain felt different now. It wasn't lonely. It was waiting. They came 3 days later, not with an army, but with something more dangerous, the unchecked power of the law. A black carriage struggled up the icy track, its wheels slipping in the mud, flanked by 2 mounted sheriff's deputies. Elias Vance stepped out, wrapped in a fur-collared coat that cost more than Elias's entire farm. Beside him was Judge Sterling, holding a leather portfolio like a weapon. Elias stood on the porch, the Winchester cradled in his arm, pointing at the ground but ready to rise. Elara stood behind him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her chin was high. She wore a dress made of homespun wool, dyed with walnut husks, the clothes of a mountain woman. "Afternoon, Thorne," Silas called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. He looked at Elara with a mixture of disgust and possession. "I see you found my wayward property." "She isn't property, Vance," Elias replied, his voice calm and deadly. "And this is private land. You're trespassing." "Not anymore." Judge Sterling stepped forward, unrolling a large map on the hood of the carriage. "As of this morning, the State Railroad Commission has exercised its right of eminent domain under the 1880 Railway Act. This ridge has been designated vital for the public good. The grade is perfect for the new coal line." "Bull," Elias spat. "There's a gap 3 miles east that's lower and wider. You're routing it here out of spite. The law does not concern itself with your geological opinions. Mr. Thorne, Sterling smiled thinly. The deed is void. You have 48 hours to vacate. The compensation has been deposited with the county clerk. It's modest. Elara stepped forward, pushing past Elias. Father, stop this. You don't want a railroad here. You want me. This is about control. Silas looked at her, his eyes cold and hard as flint. I offered you a life. Elara, you chose this filth, poverty, living in a shack with a savage. But I am a benevolent man. If you return with us now, if you agree to the marriage and take your place in society, perhaps the commission can find an alternative route. Perhaps Mr. Thorne can keep his hovel. It was the classic Gilded Age extortion. Use the law as a bludgeon to force submission. The public good was just a mask for private greed. Don't do it, Elara, Elias said, thumbing the hammer of his rifle. The click was loud in the frosty air. I'll fight them in court. I'll fight them in the trees if I have to. You'll lose, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. And you'll die. Is that what you want, girl? To watch your hero hang for resisting a federal order, or worse, shot down right here on his own porch? The wedding rehearsal was a grotesque pantomime of joy. Elara stood in the parlor of the Vance estate, draped in expensive lace, surrounded by the town's elite who drank champagne, and ignored the dead look in her eyes. Judge Sterling held her arm like a jailer holding a key, parading her around the room. A beautiful bride for a prosperous future, Sterling announced, raising a glass. To the railroad. To the railroad, the guests echoed mindlessly. Outside, a storm was raging. Wind battered the windows, rattling the glass. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open with a crash that silenced the room. The wind howled into the hallway, extinguishing the candles nearest the door. Elias Thorne stood in the entryway. He was covered in mud, his hair wild, his coat soaked. He looked like an avenging spirit from the Old Testament, risen from the earth to demand justice. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand, not a gun, but something far more lethal in the Gilded Age, evidence. Get him out! Silas screamed, his face draining of color. Sheriff! Arrest this trespasser! You might want to read this first, Sheriff, Elias boomed, his voice filling the cavernous hall. He walked forward, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He threw the papers onto the floor at the governor's feet. They scattered like autumn leaves. What is this? The sheriff asked, picking up a map that was yellowed with age. That, Elias pointed, his finger shaking with rage, is the original geological survey of this county, from 1875. I drew it when I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, and it proves that routing a train line over Blackwood Ridge is physically impossible. The room went silent. The grade is too steep, Elias continued, his voice ringing out. The rock is shale, not granite. It's unstable. Any train that tried to climb that ridge would derail within a month. It would kill everyone on board. This is a lie, Sterling stammered, stepping back. The man is a hermit. He's insane. Is he? Elias stepped forward, pulling another document from his coat. And these letters? The ones I found in the county archives, misfiled under sanitation? They show payments from the Sterling Construction Company to the Railroad Commission to approve. The route anyway. It's a fraud. A credit mobilier scheme right here in Pinehaven. You were going to take the government money, build half a tunnel, let it collapse, blame the mountain, and keep the profits. And you were going to destroy my home and her life to do it. The guests whispered. The governor, who was in attendance to bless the union, picked up a letter. He read it, his face hardening. He looked at Sterling with disgust. This is federal fraud, Ambrose, and conspiracy. You're done. Silas Vance slumped into a chair, his empire crumbling in seconds. He looked at his daughter, not with apology, but with defeat. Elara pulled her arm from Sterling's grip. She walked across the room, through the stunned crowd, to the man in the mud-stained coat. She didn't care about the whispers. She didn't care about the mud on her lace. You came back, she whispered, touching his face. I told you, Elias said, his voice soft and breaking, the fire leaving his eyes to be replaced by that same boundless love. I don't care about the land. I care about you. The land is just dirt without you, Elara. And I don't care about the name, Elara said, unhooking the pearl necklace and letting it fall to the floor. I'm ready to go home. The scandal destroyed the Sterling and Vance fortunes. The Baron was left with nothing but his empty house and his pride. But on Blackwood Ridge, wealth was measured differently. Spring came. The studio door remained open. Elara's paintings, vibrant, honest depictions of mountain life lined the walls. She and Elias sat on the porch, watching the sun set over a valley that was finally, truly theirs. They held hands, their fingers interlaced, one smooth, one rough, both strong. They say love is a fragile thing on the frontier. But some love is like the mountain laurel. It thrives in the rocky soil. It survives the hardest freeze, and when it finally blooms, it transforms the wilderness into a garden. Sometimes the greatest rescue isn't from a blizzard, but from a life that isn't yours. If Elias and Elara's story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to start over. Check out our playlist for more tales of the American frontier. What did you think of Elara's choice? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep your fire burning. Good wishes to you all.